Because nobody's like you.
So the next question you might be asking yourself is, well, how do I know where to go next to be in alignment with my authentic nature and those authentic dreams and goals, those desired changes? Well, I worked with a business coach years ago. Her name was Jan Jansen. She was in Canada. And she would share with me her technique, which I found very effective at that time as I was a new entrepreneur, was to have a weekly brainstorming session and then every week transfer 3 to 5 steps to your day timer, whether or not that's a physical calendar, an electronic calendar, however it is that you keep track of your time. And to this day, I think that's a really great idea. On a weekly basis, or perhaps you don't need it quite that often because you're going to map out a little bit longer term plan. I'm working with a different coach now, and we've got a 90-day goal, 90-day plan mapped out for me. But I find the brainstorming process to be incredibly creative and helpful. And I want to share with you 2 very specific examples from my own life of how I use a brainstorming system. And I happen to be kind of a kinesthetic, a touchy-feely kind of person. So I really rely on my easel with the rip-off pages like you just saw for the Seed of the Soul. I use those a lot with different colored markers. And I also have a wipe-off whiteboard in my home office that I use. And we'll start with this one specific example because you're listening to it right now. My authentic expression classes. Now, this idea originally came to me back in September of 2012. As I'm taping this right now, recording this class, this is June of 2015. So as you can see, this has been a process that has been brewing for me for a while. In September of 2012, I was in a Sacred Success workshop with Barbara Stanny. It was a 4-day retreat, and we immersed ourselves in the Sacred Success concepts. Now, Barbara Stanny, I've mentioned her before. She's one of my financial mentors, and her website is Barbara Stanny, Stanny, with no E.com. And here I was completing one of her exercises from the workbooks. We'd gone into kind of a quiet period. I think maybe we'd had a guided visualization, and then I started writing down whatever came to me. It felt like I was downloading, is how it felt. Now, at that time, I had started my blog. It was my first blog, and I just had stopped it. I'd made a few entries, and I was stuck on where to go. I wasn't getting any creative juices flowing. None of my ideas were making any sense to me. They didn't feel authentic, and I just stopped. And I sent out a message to all my readers, and I said, I'm going to set aside this blog because I don't like the direction it's taking. It's not really taking any direction at all. And so here I am sitting in this workshop in Seattle, Washington, SeaTac, a suburb of Seattle, and all of a sudden, all this information about authenticity just starts flowing out of me. Like from my brain, my heart, down my arm, into my hand, and into the pen, and onto the paper. And it was all this stuff about how there's a new authenticity model coming, and that it would be like 9 to 12 tenets, and it would be applicable for all these different situations in life, like work and relationships and planning dinner party, and all this stuff just started coming, and I kind of looked at the paper in amazement and went, where is this coming from? Kind of that kind of a reaction that I had. But I knew I was onto something because there was that feeling of momentum behind it, and I was getting angel bumps, and I decided to roll with it. So when I got back from that Sacred Success workshop, I picked up my blog again, and this time the theme in all through it, in every entry, I started making weekly entries, was authenticity. And of course, all of a sudden, I'd find myself reading these things about authenticity and seeing things and picking up things. And it was like I just started compiling information. When a thought would come, I'd write it down on a sticky note and put it in an authenticity folder. When I'd read a book and a segment really sung to me about authenticity, now Mark Nepo's The Book of Awakening was one of them. It was just huge for me in this process. I would write down one of his quotes and put it in the folder. I'd read something online that just smacked to me of authenticity. I'd print it out, put it in the folder. This went on for 1.5 years. I kept compiling stuff and hanging on to stuff and opening my mind and my eyes and my heart to anything that just sung to me of authenticity that needed to be included in this work. And finally the day came where I knew I was ready to start putting it together and making some kind of a class out of it. Now at that time, I did not know it was going to be a series of 5 video classes. I thought it was going to be a 2 to 4 day workshop. And so this is a process I knew I would need to be alone for and really focus on. So I rented a hotel room and I took my folder, my easels with the rip-off papers, and a whole bunch of sticky pads. And I created a ritual for myself involving the 4 elements, fire, water, air, and earth. Before I began, I meditated, I prayed, and I started organizing. Now this is what I mean by brainstorming, and a very specific example of one product that I used it on. So I started finding themes for every piece of paper, every sticky note. There was all these different themes. And so I took one of those big sheets of easel paper and I put one over here, one here, one here, one here. They were all around the hotel room. And then with each thought that fit that category, I would write that down and then put it in the appropriate category. And by the time I walked out, maybe 36 hours later, I left that hotel room. I had myself a class, and you're watching it right now. The second example I want to share with you is there's 2 branches to the work I'm doing now. Authentic expression, which you're listening to now, and also authentic performance, because I'm a certified transformational voice teacher with over 18 years of adult stage experience. And on a God walk one day, probably somewhere around 9 or 10 months ago, I'm going to say now, I was still working at my job as a claims examiner at the time, and I always took my God walk over my lunch break. I was out taking a lunch break, taking my God walk over my lunch break, when this thought just hit me that I needed to teach an acting class. And honestly, my reaction at that time was kind of like, what? Where did that come from? It had never occurred to me. As good as an actor as I've become, and as good of a teacher as I am, being certified in voice instruction, it had still never occurred to me to take all that and create an acting class. So then I had to go, well, how is that going to fit in with my authentic work? And so once again, I got out my easel and my colored markers, and I started just brainstorming different ideas, different concepts. And what came to me was the term authentic performance. And I had all of this other stuff with ideas of what I would present in a class, and those 2 words, authentic performance, on my easel. And I invited my partner, my fiance, in to take a look at this. I said, what do you think of this? And he said, well, that whole authentic performance thing, that makes me really curious. It sounds like something new. What does it mean? So then I had to figure out how to define it, which I did using this brainstorming process, just writing down words that came in different categories in different locations. And before too long, I had an agenda. I had an agenda for an authentic performance acting 8-week series, and I had a definition of the word authentic performance. And I'm happy to say that my very first class was just this last Saturday, a full class of 6 students, and it was remarkable. And so those are just 2 examples from my own life of how effective this brainstorming process can be. So this is what I encourage you to do. And then if you have to do it weekly or monthly or every 3 months, whatever works best for you, and then take the results of that brainstorming session and put those authentic steps on your calendar.
Because nobody's like you.